Well, that was just a bit of fun. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to David and Charlotte, and we're going to have fairly straightforward format. We've got a presentation, and then we're going to have a Q&A and a bit of discussion afterwards. So if you can keep yourselves muted, and then at the end we'll do the Q&A and discussion. If you can hold any questions to the end, but if you don't get a chance to ask your question, then by all means start putting the questions in the chat. That would be quite useful. Okay, so I'd like to introduce David Moynihan and Charlotte Stannard from Locality.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks, Kevin. My first challenge is going to be sharing the screen, so I'm just going to make sure I can do that first before we get going. I'm having difficulty doing that actually because I haven't got the kind of permissions at the moment. Let me just try this.
David, maybe you could send it to Kevin, and Kevin, could you try?
Yeah, Kevin, you've already got a copy of this presentation. I wonder if you can share it at your end, if that's possible.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, just while you do that, I'll just tell you a little bit about who we are. So you might know us already. We're called Locality. We're a national charity that provides a voice for community organisations, provide support to community organisations. We have 700 members across England. 100 of them are in London and many in Camden. One of our board of trustees, Alexis from Elfrida in Camden, so we have a good connection to the borough. And yeah, we provide support to community organisations. We help them to become stronger and more successful. We provide, typically we provide support on governance, finances, business plans, social impact, community engagement, taking on and managing assets. But obviously recently our work has begun to shift and we've had to become acquainted with lots of new areas of work. So things like mothballing organisations, furloughing staff, adapting to digital delivery, also adapting to food distribution, working with mutual aid groups. And now we're becoming acquainted with the kind of steps needed to kind of reopen centres and services safely. So while we can't claim to be complete experts on this area, I don't think anyone really can. And I guess 3 months ago we knew next to nothing on a lot of this. We have been working with a lot of our members and community organisations on this issue, and and also working with our partners across the sector to identify what the kind of common issues are and what the best practices around this. We've also been keeping abreast of government guidance on this. I think the government guidance on kind of the reopening of community centres not very helpfully came out only a few days ago, when centres could reopen from Saturday. So didn't really give, many organisations enough time to get acquainted with a lot of the issues. So I'll ask Kevin just to do the next slide and the one after, sorry. So this is what we're going to cover in the session. So a bit of context about this and some of the key principles. And then I want to talk a bit about the risk assessment process. It's interesting to see who's planning to reopen and when. And it'll be interesting to know whether that's based on you having already carried out a risk assessment, because that should be the tool that tells you whether it's safe for you to reopen and when. And then we'll get into some of the, the things that you need to support and observe, like social distancing, track and trace, and then tips for enabling access, ways in, ways out, and then some neighbourhood level considerations if you're opening up with, alongside lots of other businesses or possibly community centres that are opening up, and the kind of impact on the area, the neighbourhoods. And then some kind of rudimentary stuff around cleaning, hygiene, face covering, toilets, and then discussion around some of the different types of provision, what's permitted and what isn't, and what the kind of considerations on the different types of sort of services that you offer, and then communication engagement, how you're talking to your users and your staff and volunteers about all of this, and I suppose inducting them, educating them on a lot of the procedures that you're putting in place. And then we'll end with talking about enforcement, what happens if you don't observe this guidance, and some further thoughts and also some information sources that we can give you at the end. So yeah, and then hopefully, as Kevin says, we can do a kind of fairly, we can spend a bit of time on kind of questions and answers, and talk about some of these specific situations that you're focused on. Okay, the next slide, please. So in terms of context, obviously, we're talking about community centres, community spaces, and many of these are going to be multi-use community facilities. So typically, a lot of the community organisations we work with, and I'm sure this is the same for a lot of the spaces that you work in, you deliver more than one type of activity. You may hire out to others, but you might have a nursery, you deliver services to a range of people in the community. So by their very nature, they're quite complicated spaces. They're also very communal, and the fact that they're communal means that they're vulnerable to the spread of coronavirus. And most of the centres have been closed. This is sort of borne out in the poll as well. During the lockdown, a few have stayed open for where they've kind of changed to food distribution or provided nurseries for key workers. But from Saturday, the 4th of July, you've been able to reopen, but this is completely at your own discretion. It's obviously not mandatory for you to reopen, but you are permitted to open if you follow the government guidance. And it's also worth remembering that these spaces are also workplaces. You have a duty of care to your staff and volunteers as well as your users. And you need to also remember that you have staff and volunteers that may continue to shield during this period. That's at their own discretion now. And yeah, the multi-use nature of the spaces makes the reopening advice quite difficult. Some activities are permitted and some are not. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to my colleague Charlotte now, key principles.
Next, thank you, Kevin. Hello, I'm Charlotte from Locality. David's already touched on the fact that just because you can open doesn't mean you have to. It's a decision for your trustees or your board and your team. So it's absolutely not compulsory to open. It's entirely your decision. What do the users want? I heard somebody mentioning earlier that some users want it, some don't. Are they feeling safe? Do they want to come in? Is it worth opening up just for a handful of people? So it's important to keep talking to the users. So is it safe and is it viable? Given the current circumstances, can you make your place safe? And we'll go on to talk a bit about safety in a minute. can the changes to operation that you're going to make comply with employment law and health and safety law? The new guidance that comes out, the new community centre guidance that David mentioned, anything that's in there, health and safety law supersedes it. It's purely guidance. So you have to keep an eye on health and safety and employment law. The last slide has some links to the guidance that we're recommending that you look at. So there are safe workplace guidelines to ensure employees are safe to return to work. So more information on that on the last slide. And as David mentioned, there's this new community centre guidance that's just come out from the government. It's a bit late, which isn't that helpful. It's important to ensure that the users and hirers of a community facility are aware of their responsibility for managing risks. So your approach will be a risk-based approach, and any hirers that are using the space will have to have their own risk assessment. So I would suggest adding some additional clauses to your hiring agreement that covers the responsibility of the hirer, because they're responsible for ensuring that those attending their activities and events comply with the COVID-19 secure guidelines. So the hirer has got responsibilities as well. The other thing to bear in mind is to check your insurance cover. I would suggest that you contact your insurer under any circumstances, just to make sure that they know you're going to reopen, if you are going to reopen, and that you're aware of any additional clauses or anything that they want to tell you. So I think you should contact your insurer under any circumstances if you plan to reopen. Can I have the next slide, please, Kevin? Staff, of course, a lot of the staff are extremely clinically vulnerable. So it's important that you know who out of your staff are shielding. And can you function with the minimum number of staff? Can you run on a skeleton staff? So it's important that you know which of your staff, it's still their choice if they want to work from home. So can you run with just the minimum amount of staff? And is it viable? What are the cost implications for reopening? What's the cost of equipment? All the things that you need to buy, the cleaning, all the stuff that you need to get for your cleaner, the PPE and the signage. Is it viable with all the additional costs if you're only going to have a handful of users? So I guess it's about continually revising your budgets and cash flow forecasts. Also, it's about taking a risk-based approach. And it's important to do everything that's reasonably practicable to minimise the risk or potential risks to your users and staff and anybody else coming into the building. So David's going to talk a bit more about risk assessments.
David, you're muted.
Yep. So yeah, this is a really important part of the process. I think it's essential that you undertake, if you are planning to open, that you undertake a really detailed risk assessment. And here's the kind of government suggested template for this. And this will help you, A, decide whether you're going to reopen, B, what your capacity is in terms of your space, how many people that you're going to be able to house at any one time, and the activities that you can proceed with safely. And if you've done other kind of risk management processes, it's not a million miles away from that. So it's a case of identifying the key hazards, all the kind of foreseen issues that might crop up, and then thinking about the impact of those, in terms of staff, users, volunteers, and how you're going to sort of avoid or how you're going to help avoid those risks occurring, and how you're going to mitigate them if they do occur. And I would think about it in terms of specific rooms in the building, so focusing on the kitchen and other rooms that you've got within your space. Think about it in terms of the different activities and services that you're anticipating delivering, so breaking it down in that way. And then looking at the impact, as I say, across staff, volunteers, and users. And I would also highlight the kind of higher risk groups, such as older people, people from BAME backgrounds, pregnant people, and other vulnerable groups that are at kind of higher risk of coronavirus. So, you know, think about the services where you have, you know, you're engaging higher number from these groups. Okay, next slide. So yeah, we have to follow the guidelines on social distancing. I must admit, having gone through the guidance in detail, this is the area that I feel is a little bit muddy. So I'll kind of, you know, say that at the start. But yeah, you have to continue observing social distancing. So that's 2 meters, as you all know, but you are also permitted to keep it to 1 meter with additional risk mitigation where 2 meters is not viable. So that might involve mandatory wearing of face masks and other steps that you've made to allow for kind of a 1 meter rule where the 2 meters is not viable. The size and circumstances of the premises will determine the maximum number that can be accommodated, and again, you would find that out through the risk management process. Look at your total floor space and the kind of likely pinch points. Take into account where there's going to be bottlenecks. Focus on your kind of entrances and exits, and possibly think about a kind of one-way system in and out of the community space if that's viable. Social interactions are still limited when indoors to 2 households and or support bubbles. When outdoors, you can have 6 people from different households. So if you have if you have a number of people there, they're kind of social interactions where they don't sort of social distancing is still limited to those 2 households and support bubbles. Gatherings of more than 30 people are not permitted unless your venue is considered COVID-19 secure. So I've got a slide on what we mean by COVID-19 secure. But I would advise not to, to have gatherings of more than 30. And then clarity, you should also think about the clarity of these rules, these social distancing rules, so that your users and staff and volunteers are aware of the system that you're putting in place, particularly users. Obviously, you can brief staff and volunteers. So when a user comes to your space, signage is good, but even better is if you had some sort of buddy system where, everyone is getting a kind of quick induction to the social distancing rules, at your community space when they arrive. So they're in no doubt, about those rules. And then on to the COVID-19 security. I suppose this is the bit that I was referring to when I was saying that some of the guidance on this is a little bit muddy, but this is self-certified. So if you can consider your community space to be COVID-19 secure if you've carried out these following steps, and if you have carried out these steps, you're able to then print off this poster and put it on your door to make users aware that you've taken these steps and you're a COVID-19 secure venue. So this involves carrying out the risk assessment, undertaking all the cleaning, hand washing and hygiene procedures that is in the guidance, taking all reasonable steps to help people work from home, maintaining the 2 meter distance in the workplace, and also, if you're not able to do 2 meters, you've done everything practical to manage the transmission risk. So that if there is, a real need to have an event with more than 30 people, you have to, be COVID-19 secure, and these are the steps that are expected. And then the next slide, just some examples of some signage that you could use. I don't know if you should get any help from the council on signage, but it might be worth talking to them about it. But there are lots of templates out there if you have a printer, and just make sure that these are clear and and can be seen by users at every interval. Okay, back over to Charlotte. Charlotte?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the slide to change. Sorry, Kevin. So I'll just carry on. As a community centre or a community venue, you'll be expected to be part of the track and trace system that the government has introduced as part of their easing up. So it'll mean that everybody that comes into the venue will, their details will need to be kept for 21 days. And you might need to go through your records and contact people if somebody tests positive. So the 3 steps are that testing, anyone who has symptoms of coronavirus should be booked into a test with the NHS test and trace to see if they have the virus. They have to identify the close contacts they've been in touch with for 48 hours before and 7 days after, and alert close contacts. So when people come into the centre, you'll have to take their name and contact details and keep them on record for 21 days to help the authorities deal with clusters and outbreaks. So that's an increased amount of admin work for you that's worth thinking about. Thank you, Kevin. Again, this is about managing multiple exit and entry points. It might be worth thinking about introducing one-way systems with signage on the floor, and also making reasonable adjustments for people with disabilities. And think about managing the arrival and departure times of people and staggering arrivals and departures. And think about the queue management. And if you think something is going to be popular or busy, it's worth putting in signs on the floor so that people know they've got to stand 2 meters apart. Thank you. Kevin?
And yeah, so neighbourhood level consideration. So this is where you're opening up, on a high street or in an area where there's lots of other businesses that are kind of reopening at the same time. I think it's worth talking to some of the other venues, businesses, about their plans, and thinking about the kind of overall impact of more people coming into that area. So that might get you to think about further lowering the capacity, or thinking about between you staggering the sort of times for your services, your entry times, trying to avoid queues, also thinking about how the impact on the sort of transport hubs as well. So I would advise you to do that with the the other businesses and possibly community organisations or venues in the locality as well. And in terms of cleaning, so this is where it gets quite, as I say, rudimentary. So it's just making sure all surfaces are cleaned. Have a think about the surfaces that are most frequently touched. We've got a kind of link to some specific guidance around cleaning, and also if you get a particular, if you get an outbreak, if you have somebody who has a suspected case of COVID-19, the kind of steps that you take, within the space, should that situation arise. Obviously allow sufficient time for cleaning before reopening, and where possible, improve ventilation in the premises. There has been some speculation about the impact on air conditioning and the kind of higher transmission rates indoors. So using kind of natural ventilation where possible, it would help. Obviously, we've already talked about the signs and posters, and you know, making sure that we're maintaining good hand washing technique. So signs up in the toilets, hand sanitizer in various multiple locations, particularly on entrance in reception areas, as well as in the washrooms. Yeah, and just providing good hand drying facilities as well, so paper towels or electric dryers as well. Okay, back over to Charlotte.
Charlotte, you're muted.
Sorry. On entering and leaving a community facility, everyone, including staff, should be asked to wash their hands thoroughly for at least 20 seconds using soap and water and hand sanitizer if hand washing facilities are not available. I mean, it might be helpful to put up stations for hand sanitizer all over the building. If you can, you should wear a face covering in enclosed spaces where social distancing is impossible. But there's evidence, it's a bit of a moot point whether face coverings actually help. There might be some evidence to suggest that if somebody has COVID and they're not showing symptoms, then wearing a face mask can help to prevent them from passing it on. But it doesn't mean that you don't have to socially distance. You just have to use them with great caution. And children under the age of 3 shouldn't be required to wear them. And there's a list of people who don't have to wear them as well. There are special circumstances where people don't have to wear them. And they shouldn't be confused. Face masks shouldn't be confused with the proper surgical masks or respirators. These should be reserved for people who need them working in the NHS. So just to repeat that face masks do not negate the need for social distancing, but they might be advisable in an enclosed space. Thank you, Kevin. Now we're going to talk about toilets. I never thought I'd be spending a whole slide talking about toilets, but toilets, obviously they're a real pinch point and a real potential danger area. So they should be kept open and carefully managed to reduce the risk of transmission. It might be worth putting an engaged vacant sign on the door so that only one person can go into communal toilets at one time. And use signs and posters to build awareness of good hand washing. Also, Legionella is a real thing to consider. If the building has been empty for a long time and you haven't been going in regularly to flush, then there's the potential that bacteria might have built up. So you need to look into the advice provided there. There's a good advice document from the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health on how you reopen a building after it's been closed. And also if you've got coffee machines or water filters that you need to flush them through if the water's been standing in there. Also use markings to indicate where people should socially distance when they're queuing for toilets. And also enable good hand hygiene by making hand sanitizer available at all sort of points of entry. Ensure suitable hand washing facilities, including running water and liquid soap and suitable options for drying. Be aware that taps and door handles are particularly vulnerable to people touching them. Set clear use and cleaning guidance for toilets with increased frequency of cleaning in line with usage. Keep the facilities well ventilated, as David said, and put up a visible cleaning schedule so people can be reassured that it is being cleaned on a regular basis, and provide more waste facilities and more frequent rubbish collection. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, I'm just going to sort of pick up on the guidance of what is and isn't permitted. Obviously, early years and youth provision has been permitted to open since the 1st of June in line with schools. But from the in terms of voluntary sector and other provision, I mean, some services have also been permitted. Urgent public services such as food banks, homeless services, blood donation sessions have been permitted. But this is this is broadening out now. So where it isn't possible to deliver services digitally, and where it is safe for staff to come to work, then there's a much broader range of voluntary sector and wider range of services that can be offered. Some recreation, leisure and social gatherings, but in terms of what's not permitted, large gatherings or celebrations, live performances including drama, comedy, music that take place in front of a live audience, indoor sports activities that would typically take place in a gym, sports venue, fitness or dancing studio. And then meetings should continue to take place digitally where there isn't need for face-to-face contact. Communication and engagement is obviously a big part of all of this. We've talked a lot already about signage and speaking with users and staff. But it's really important to provide clear messages to your users about the changes that you have made and your approach to reopening. I think if you have a good dialogue with your users, with local residents, use that to kind of inform the basis of your decision about opening. Is there interest in using these services? FOGO is a new term. So people used to talk about fear of missing out, fear of going out, is the new acronym, which is, you might change the lockdown rules, but, it might be a while before people feel comfortable coming to settings, where they're going to be around, have face-to-face contact with a lot of people. So again, you have to think about your assumptions about whether people are going to access those services face to face, and encourage your users to highlight any issues or any anxieties they have. So sort of finding out what you can try and anticipate what the issues are, but actually speaking to users prior to reopening, but also during the kind of initial stages of reopening, getting that kind of real-time information about where they feel comfortable, where they don't feel comfortable. I think as I said earlier, you can do all the planning in the world, but I think in the first week you'll get a strong sense of the unknowns, the things that you hadn't thought about, and you have to be quite flexible and adaptable to those, and you need to keep in regular dialogue with the people who are using the space. Okay, and then finally over to Charlotte for the last couple of slides.
The information on this slide is taken directly from the recently issued guidance for the safe use of multi-purpose community facilities, and it talks about enforcement. So if you don't undertake a risk assessment and you don't act on that risk assessment, it could constitute a breach of health and safety law, which is fairly serious. So your risk assessment needs to happen and it needs to be ongoing. Otherwise you might be breaching health and safety law. So serious breaches and failure to comply with enforcement notices can constitute a criminal offence with serious fines and even imprisonment for up to 2 years. So it's very important that you're following the guidance, and it laid out in the information that the government has just issued. And could you please go on, Kevin? Oh, further thoughts. So we've already mentioned some of these thoughts already, but it's very important to involve the board, staff and volunteers in your decision making, especially when you're doing your risk assessment. Your staff might know about problems and issues that you haven't thought about. Important to be agile to the experience of users, staff and volunteers. So you'll find out a lot in the first week, and I'm sure that 12% of people who've already opened have learned an awful lot and could probably share a lot of information with us as well. So think about how some of these changes will become more permanent over the short to medium term. And also think about your adaptability to change as the guidelines are amended, because things are going to change frequently as lockdown measures ease. So it's important to think about your adaptability as you go along and do frequent risk assessments. Thank you, Kevin. So really, these are links to further information. So it's very important for you all to read the guidance from the government. So we've also put a link to a locality toolkit that we've got about reopening community centres, which you can click on the link there. Unless David's got anything to say, I think we're finished and we can go to questions. We've got 56 comments in the chat, so I don't know how we're going to sift out the questions from that, but we'll give it a go.
Right, okay, well thanks very much Charlotte and David, that was really interesting. A lot to get to grips with now. Yes, questions. So let me throw it open to the floor, and you can wave, or you can put up your hand with you can raise a virtual hand. Okay. So Adam, is that a hand wave that you want to?
Yes, I thank you for the presentation. I just wondered about the cleaning schedule. If you could give a broad guideline on, say, how often would you clean a toilet? Is it after every single use, or once an hour? Likewise for things like door handles. I'm wondering if I need to, employ a full-time cleaner or something like that.
Well, I would recommend, in terms of how often it's done, I think that would be part of the risk assessment that you'd undertake. It would depend on numbers of users and traffic and people coming in and out. I probably shouldn't recommend a product, but Milton, have you come across Milton spray? They say that it's 99%. Tackles COVID. So it might be about leaving a spray of Milton in the toilet for people to spray after they've been, and you could make it clear that people are expected to do that. So have a conversation. Do you have a cleaner already?
Just on the weekends.
Just on the weekends, yeah. So I guess that's a conversation with the trustees and the staff to see, well, what kind of usage do we have? I think it really depends on that, and how you think you're going to mitigate against that. But again, the responsibility needs to be on the users as well to clean up after themselves and to make that clear. So I don't know if David's got any thoughts to add.
No, that sounds,
And just to add, presumably, I think some of us will be in buildings where we aren't fully in control of the cleaning. Maybe it's the landlord who arranges that. So that's an issue. If we think there should be extra cleaning, I guess we have to take it to the landlord and say more needs to be done. And then I suppose the costs will fall on us. Is that a fair assumption? Gemma, you've got a question. You're muted.
How many people have applied for COVID special emergency funds? But there's the London funders one, there's the lottery one, and we've received funding from MOPAC emergency fund, that's the Mayor's office. Now our PPE costs will be enormous. So we've thought about this stuff quite a while ago because, we have, we do complementary and alternative medicines, which involves touching people. So we've thought about this quite a while ago, and we did apply for costs for PPE and additional cleaning, and we got those. So it's just an important something to consider, and those funds are still available. I think one of the funds has just reopened, London funders, I think. But anyway, you can apply for those costs, but they need to be realistic because you will be doing a lot of extra cleaning and maybe some deep cleaning.
And just to add to that as well, that a lot of that funding has to be spent before the end of the year. So you also have to think about how you're going to, because it's likely that some of this will continue, into the future. So you have to think about how you you know, embed these approaches into your, you know, into your practice.
Gemma, and does
Just
that
very quickly, yeah, very quickly, just to say, obviously we stocked up on cleaning materials and PPE. Our grant with MOPAC is until October. So yes, that's a problem. The funding's short term.
Right, and do you? Sorry, I'm not up to speed here. Is complementary therapies? Do you have an opening date for that?
September.
September, right? Okay.
But we might not be running all therapies. I haven't finished my risk assessment.
No. Okay, interesting. I see that Rosie Holiday, Rosie, come in because you've put some interesting questions in the chat as well. So go ahead.
Just a question. So we run a service. If the building is not our own, so there's lots of things we need to figure out with that. But we run a service where we run group programs for a number of clients, obviously all from different households. So I just wondered if there's. I'm sorry if I've misunderstood, but what the guidance is in terms of running, you know, self-development groups or training, and if does that count as a social interaction? It would be indoors as well.
Doesn't count as a social interaction if they're social distancing as part of the group work. So if you're doing that and maintaining social distances, that doesn't count as a social interaction.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, interesting. So I think that was a question on a lot of people's minds, because the whole two households seemed a little bit unclear, but that makes it clearer. Any other questions? And just by the way, I noticed a few people have said, are we sharing the presentation and everything? So yes, that will be up on the VAC website shortly, hopefully in the next 48 hours. So any other questions, or I don't know if David or Charlotte, you picked up any questions in the chat that you thought you might want to address?
I think you know, there's some mention about cost implications, and I think that was one of the points that Charlotte raises, is that, you know, you can think about the kind of safety aspects for reopening, but I think it's quite legitimate to not reopen on kind of financial grounds. You know, if all of these costs, you know, which include cleaning and other measures that you are taking place, actually means that you're not financially viable, you're losing money delivering your services, then I think that's a good reason not to proceed with reopening.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. I don't know if any of the C4 members want to jump in. I mean, Sarah, I heard you talking about this on a meeting the other day about, you know, if there's half the number of people in an activity, then that's half the income with extra costs. So your kind of balance of costs and expenditure are completely different now. I don't know if there are any other thoughts on that.
Kevin, is that me, Sarah, or another Sarah?
Yes, it was you, Sarah. It was you. It was you. I heard talking about it on a meeting last week.
It's quite interesting. I mean, KTCC, like many other community centres, have lost a substantial amount of money during this period. I think we're on about £5,000 a month, which is tiny compared to some other centres. But there is a reality for us that some of our hirers who do Pilates, yoga, Zumba, that kind of stuff, will have fewer people in their classes, either because of social distancing or because people don't feel comfortable doing that, and therefore they won't get the money, and therefore we can't charge them the money. So we'd be looking initially from September, when we envisage people to kind of start trickling back, to do introductory fees so that it is plausible for someone to hire our space and make the money back, because actually that's what we want in the long term. But it is interesting.
And this is very slightly off topic, but to what extent can your hirers actually mix online and offline? So for instance, I know one of your hirers is Russian Ballet. Now they've been doing a lot of experiments with Zoom Ballet. Now, if they could get the same number of participants by having, say, half of them there in real life and half of them on Zoom, would that work, or are they?
You see, that's really interesting for us. If you just look at the financial model, Zoom is not great for community centres because we want people to be in our spaces. And if people, you know, what I'm relying on is the fact that people want to be with other people. Fair enough at a socially distanced space, but I'm hoping that we're all sick to the back teeth of Zoom calls, apart from this one, obviously. And so as a result, people want to come together. But where you have a heavy presence online, you know, the risk is, do people need to come back? Is it more convenient to do your Zumba from your home? You know, you don't have to travel to a centre, you can change at home, you can have a shower afterwards, all these sorts of things.
You can turn the camera off at embarrassing moments.
Yeah, exactly. You can kick the cat, which is what I often have to do. But no, it was really interesting. I mean, we just weren't organised enough to do any online stuff, if I'm honest. It just wasn't something that we had capacity to do. And I really would, we didn't close our centre, and I really do feel for people who have to make the decision to open, because it would be a very, very difficult decision for us. You know, when do you do it, what time? And in fact, because we didn't close, the decision was made for us, which was really useful. But it is interesting, and I'm having lots of talks with my trustees at the moment as to what a community centre looks like, because the reality is that the old models of having lots of hirers just might not happen. It might not be convenient anymore, you know, especially if you can Zoom, sweat, kick the cat, and do it without anyone seeing you. It's kind of might work better for people. I don't know.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I've got a couple more questions. I can see there's a few questioners. I've got Foyser and Boris, Boris, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us what your question is?
Sure. Hi, my name's Boris. I run a youth club called Arc Youth Club on the Roleway estate in Camden. I was just wondering if I could ask a question about sort of bubbles. We received guidance from the National Youth Agency, which is connected, and I know a lot of people on this chat do work with young people. One of the things that wasn't entirely clear from the guidance, I appreciate they've put this together at speed, was stuff around bubble groups for sort of young people. And I was just wondering if you guys know, maybe you don't know, and that's fair enough, but what they sort of talk about is, where possible, to keep groups of young people or people in general in sort of in bubbles. Now, I know that a lot of community centres and youth spaces work on a drop-in basis, and so I was wondering, would it be possible to say have a group that walk up on the day, 12 people is the maximum, and those 12 people would count as a bubble for the day? Is that a reasonable interpretation of the guidance, would you say?
I think on my part, I don't know is the honest answer, but I don't know if Charlotte knows, or anyone else actually knows a bit more about this. So I can't help you in terms of knowing the detail on that. So, Charlotte?
Sorry, I don't think the guidance is that clear. So I'm looking to other people to see if they've got direct experience. Roz has got a hand up.
Hi, yes, I work with children, and we're taking our sort of lead from the guidance that's coming into schools, which is bubbles of 15 children and young people with 1 or 2 teachers, a teacher maybe, and a teaching assistant. So, but the children are the bubble and the teachers are separate from that bubble. So the teachers can go into other classrooms, but that bubble of children have to stay together and not interact with another bubble of children. One of the issues, I think, is that that's the same bubble. So every day they come in, when they're back at school, they'll be in the same bubble. So what's tricky, I think, is if it's different children coming and going, which is sort of one of the issues we've got at our charity. And of course, your children might be a bubble at school, and then if they come into your environment, that's a different bubble. that might be really tricky. If you can establish a bubble before they come and go, okay, this is my Tuesday evening bubble, which is what I'm thinking of working out. Also trying to connect with who they're with at school, if where possible. That's maybe one way of doing it. It's very, very complicated, I think, because they're all going to be in other bubbles.
Yeah.
Yes, that's really interesting, Ros. Thanks for that. Now, I've got a few people with hands up. I've got Graham, Foyser, Rosie. Were any of you on this point about the bubbles and young people, or are you on separate questions? Okay, so sorry, I think it's a very big group. I'm slightly struggling. So I think, Graham, you've had your hand up for a while. Foyser, you're next, then Rosie. So Graham. You just unmute yourself, Graham.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it was something that I think might have been partly answered a little bit earlier, but I think the volume was, certainly on my reception, it was very, very poor. It may have been the same for others. But the guidance for community centres has got this seemingly contradictory requirement that you have social interactions in groups of no more than 2 households, but simultaneously, literally within the same paragraph, in fact I think in the same sentence, says groups of up to 30 or sometimes more than 30, which are rather large households. And I'm just wondering precisely if we could explore what is meant by having social interaction between households, because if we literally say you can't have, for example, more than 2 households within one room, I think community centres may as well shut up and go home now, because you can't actually work with groups of 6 or 7 people in a large room and make it viable. So I wonder if we could explore precisely what those terms mean about social interaction, groups of 2 or more households, and simultaneously saying groups of up to 30. Because I think they're contradictory.
Yeah, I mean, as I understood that, is that you can have a gathering of, say, 29 people as long as you're social distancing, so that within that space you're maintaining.
Sorry, could you speak up or nearer your mic?
Yeah, sure. So, if you have a social gathering of 30 people, as long as those people are socially distancing within your community space, then that is permitted. The social interactions of where people aren't social distancing, they're connecting with each other.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's just my interpretation of social interaction in a logical sense would be if 10 people are in a room, even a big room, and they're spaced out, 10 people are in a room and talking, they're interacting socially.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can see Graham's point, because if you had a large enough room, and then you had
as we do,
as you do, and you have, so that everyone sits 2 meters apart, then you're both social interacting and you're social distancing.
And I think the same will apply in most community centres, because most of us have got at least one large room.
Right.
It wouldn't be my choice of vernacular, but it's how the government decided to articulate it.
Right. Okay. I mean, I guess some of this is sort of going to, shake out as people get experience. And I guess locality, you have a lot of members with community buildings, and I suppose that your knowledge on this is going to change rapidly. So, I mean, perhaps if we, maybe we get a check in with an update in a couple of weeks' time, we may have better answers to some of these questions. So let me go to, so it's Foyser next and then Rosie. So Foyser, over to you.
All right, thanks Kevin. My question was, I had 2 questions. One was quite actually similar to Graham, but I wanted to give a real example of our situation, following from what Graham said. Perhaps that would help. Firstly, is this, you know, we've got a mosque and a church group using our facilities, and so if they were to come back, and they haven't yet, but there has been some sounding of that, but if they were to come back and say, look, could we start to hire up your facilities for those sorts of services coming up? You know, how do we manage a group of 30 people if it does, and when it does get to that point? Because, you know, the sorts of kind of issues that Graham raised, these are kind of the things that we're going to be facing. And my second question was on the issues of track and trace. Now, we've kept open as a facility, but we have only specific people coming in at a specific time, particularly to pick up food parcels and drop them off. So we don't have too many people in the building at the same time. So those people who are coming into the building, do they all need to register themselves, even though they're not all coming in a sense? You know, they're not together at one time. So we you know, our general public policy is that there'll be 2 people in the hall and 2 volunteers can come in and pick up the bag. So there's no more than 4 people in a very, very large space. So every person who comes into the building during the course of the day, do they all need to be part of that track and trace? So if someone who came in the morning, had COVID, the person who came 5 o'clock in the afternoon, do they also, in a sense, need to be notified if there was an issue?
I mean, that's an interesting question, Foyz. I mean, Charlotte, David, what do you think? I suppose the analogy maybe is with a pub. So if you went in and booked, you have to give your details. But if you have a takeaway, you just collect and go. You've just briefly visited. What do you think, David, Charlotte?
I think yes. My interpretation is that anybody coming into the building has to give their contact details and has to be part of the track and trace. So I would, yes, the admin system needs to be in place to support it. Do you agree, David?
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, it's popping your name and details on a bit of paper. So in terms of the impact, it isn't that great. It's a bit annoying, but
what I mean, just
would it help to record the timing, I suppose, in terms of when people are coming and going? So that might also help. So
because you're only allowed to have the details on record for 21 days.
Right, yeah.
So yes, I guess 21 days after the time they've been in, you have to dispose of that information. But yeah, no, they have to. I'm sure they'd have to be part of that scheme, even if they're just popping in and popping out again. But can I address the other point that you mentioned, Foyz? Yeah. You know, like the first point you raised about 30 people coming in to use the building or the mosque. Is it people that you are responsible for yourself, or is it people that are hiring and bringing 30 people in as hirers?
It will be the hire groups.
So what I would suggest is that the hiring agreement between your organisation and the users needs to have some additional information added into it about the fact that they need to do their own risk assessment and that they're responsible for the people that they're bringing in terms of making sure that they're COVID safe. It might be possible that we can offer some suggested wording for additional clauses that need to go into your hiring agreement so that it's really clear about who has to clean when and how. So is it a case that you have to clean thoroughly for when your hirers come in, or is it a case that your hirers have to clean, you know, who's doing the cleaning and who's responsible? So there's lots of other things to consider as well. Mm-hmm. And I'd be happy to offer some suggested wording to add into hiring agreements so that everybody's clear about the fact that they have to risk assess and they have to clean as well and take their rubbish home, or, you know, lots of other things to think about. So I think that's probably the way to go.
That would be amazing. Yeah, that would be amazing if you can give us some wordings on that. So
yeah, okay. Certainly do that. I don't know if David's got more things to raise on that.
Graham's just put up, you know, that there is some specific guidance for worship groups, and perhaps we can find the link for that and pull it up in the chat. The other thing that I would say is just to, you know, to look at, you know, whether that group needs to come together face to face. I think that's the first thing to test really, is that, you know, presumably the group is meeting via Zoom like everyone else at the moment. So just with all the steps that you would need to take to host that group, is there any real need for that to be a face-to-face interaction at this particular time?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yes, I know actually Foiza Zubair has been talking to the mosques about applying that guidance on groups. So he's a useful person to talk to. I've got some questions. There's been some questions. Lisa's mentioned public health's guidance. We'll talk about that in a minute. And I think that that's been raised a couple of times. Rosie, you had a question.
Thank you. Just another quick one about if there's any guidance specifically on food. So usually if we're kind of asking our service users to come in for a full day of training or group program, we do provide lunch or light refreshments. Is there anything specific on kind of food provision?
That's a good question. David, do you know any information about food?
I've just been sorting out my volume on the computer, so sorry, I've missed that question. Do I sound better to start with? Can you hear?
A little clearer, yes. So Rosie's question really was about food, guidance around food provision.
Yeah, doing groups, sort of like refreshments, teas, coffees, and sometimes a full kind of cooked lunch, if feeling generous.
Heard from members, in terms of food is, it's to be avoided, if possible. So, anything that involves sharing, biscuits on plates, all the things that we would normally associate with, sort of community centre events should be avoided, because you've got multiple people contacting, the same services. So, to be avoided if you can, but obviously where you're using cups and mugs, just be extra vigilant in terms of the cleaning, and there might also be a case it's not very good for the sort of climate challenge, but possibly use disposable cups for teas and coffees, as that might kind of mitigate against as well.
There's a bit of background noise. If anyone's unmuted, if they could just mute themselves. Yes, I've seen guidance about using disposables in particular, making sure you're not sharing, and sort of, I did see some guidance that people should eat at their desks, which it seems a bit contradictory, given we've had years of being told that that's a dirty place to eat and we should be going out, but apparently that's now the safe place. By the way, we've been gathering some other resources, so we've been putting them in our resources page under the future planning. So there are a few other examples of risk assessments and templates, and there's some other examples there and we'll of course be adding today's presentation to that. Now I know, sorry Charlotte.
Would it be possible just to hear from people that have stayed open, just to get a sense of other issues that perhaps we haven't covered? Because as I say, I don't manage a community space. I speak to a lot of organisations that do, but some of the best advice comes from people who have been running these spaces and are confronted by some of these issues. So I don't know if it's worth just hearing from, if anyone is left on the call who has a space that they've opened or it has been opened during this period.
Yeah, good idea. Anyone want to share? I know a few have been open during this period. I know Centre 404 has stayed open because of the vulnerable residents. Obviously, Foiza, I know you're one of the ones that's kept going. I don't know if there's anything you would like to add.
I mean, I could say something, Kevin. Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, what we've had to do by staying open, in a sense, is stop in terms of our normal kind of activities where it would have required people to come into the building to engage in something, and I think that's been the kind of the major changes. But what we've had to do as an organization is kind of adapt as a team in terms of how we can actually rotate people coming in. So there'll be a team of people working from home and people coming into the facility as well, to support and coordinate the food distribution, the food bank, and the hot meals, and the collections of medications and various other things as well. So we've always had a team dedicated. So previously, people perhaps may have had a specific role before the COVID. They were all issued new roles and responsibilities, and that's in a sense kind of helped. We still haven't really opened up the building for general public to come in. So even if our food bank was there, we didn't allow people to come in and pick what they wanted. It was, in a sense, we're sorted and distributed at the point of entrance. So, I mean, it'd be interesting to know if any other organisation has still kept their building open to public to some extent, but we haven't done so at all.
Sarah, yours has been open. Anyone else on the call who've kept their buildings open during this period?
Hi, Kevin. It's Simone here from Kentish Town City Farm.
Oh, hi.
So, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, please.
Hi.
What's your experience been?
We're obviously slightly different because we're outdoors mainly, although we do get an income from our indoor building. But we opened up 3 weeks ago, and families have to book in order to come to the farm. And the main thing that we found really difficult is we have up to 6 families an hour, and that's obviously an outdoor space. But each of those families, we have to meet, greet, take to the hand washing facilities, take them through the health and safety. Then after each family have washed their hands, we have to clean the hand washing station. So we have to clean the hand washing station between each 6 families every hour. And then they walk around the farm, and then when they come back down, they wash their hands again. Then we have to show them to the door. When they leave, we have to spray the door. We then have 10 minutes to go in and clean the toilets. So staffing wise, it's really difficult to manage. So I think that that's really just worth bringing up. But my real question is, with the test and trace, going back to Foy's point about who's in your building during the day, the timing of those people is really important, because you only have to alert people who are called close contacts. And the NHS guidelines that were given to us last week, there are 3 definitions of what a close contact is. And so someone who's in the building at 4 o'clock in the afternoon would not have to be alerted under those guidelines if someone at 10 o'clock in the morning had been in the building and had COVID under those guidelines that were produced last week. So timing is really important. But my question is do we have to alert the people in our own organisation who were in the building or at the centre at the same time, or do we give the information to the NHS and then they alert those people that there's been a case of COVID at your organisation? Because I'd like to know, whether anyone's had experience of actually phoning up essentially complete strangers and telling them that there's been a case of COVID at their organisation.
As I understand it, it's the latter. So it's letting the NHS track and trace team know, and then they alert through an anonymous, text message that they've been in contact with somebody with COVID and that they need to self-isolate. So that's the method by which it's done. It also means that it also helps in terms of the sort of data handling aspect of it as well.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, there is, so Piers Simey from Public Health has done a very useful presentation. Now that's up on our website, and he's just alerted us yesterday that there is an update to that coming. So it's really worth having a look at that. I'm going to make sure that that's together with the other resources from today, so that's easy to find, so that you don't have to go trawling through. But it is really useful, and there's lots of detail in there. There's still some lack of clarity, but there is also a whole section for managers, because some of this relies on people, if they feel they have symptoms, then signing up for a test. I mean, if they decide not to, what do you do as a manager? And there are some other interesting points which impinge on this discussion we had earlier about the 2 meters. So it seems that contacts who have maintained rigidly 2 meters wouldn't be asked to self-isolate, but people who have been using a 1 meter plus might be. Now that's worth looking at closely, because you don't want to find yourself in a position where one person tests positive and then suddenly all of your staff are required to self-isolate for 14 days. So that's worth looking at that presentation. It's on our website, and there will be an update to that as well very, very shortly. And Chloe, I know you asked about that specifically as well, and I'm not sure if it deals with the age limits on there on test and trace. I don't know if anyone else knows about the impact of age on the test and trace regime. Is that 18 plus, or does that involve young people as well? I'm not sure. We can clarify with peers at Public Health if no one has an answer to that.
Yeah, I think what I've seen is up to 11 to 13, which is in itself a strange band, to an upper limit in order for that to have a kind of a band. But yeah, 11 to 13 is the the guidance that I've seen on that. Up to that age, it's not required.
Okay, good. Any other questions or points? Okay.
It's Honey from Women in Health.
Oh,
Hi.
Honey. Okay. Well,
it's just I haven't heard anyone mention it, but when we reopen in September, I've got concerns about if somebody comes in and they may have slight symptoms or temperature, and places are in people using a thermometer, taking temperature people. Is that something that is in the guidelines? Is that something that we are able to do, or what are the people's rights?
Honey, it's actually in the guidelines. I mean, I think it's worth looking at closely. There is a whole section on what to do if you think a staff member is showing symptoms but is refusing to take a test. Then there is also, interestingly, I believe, not recommended that you take their temperature, but there is detailed guidelines on that presentation, and Piers has alerted us that more detailed presentation will be coming soon.
Because my concern is, because we're doing the body treatments, and how that will work if we're seeing a client who the therapist feels that may be having symptoms, and would they have a right for their own duty of care for themselves to kind of insist? It's almost like if somebody comes in and we feel that they've used some substances, and if we can say to them, well, then we can refuse to maybe offer the treatment if they don't comply.
And I suppose I'm assuming that a lot more guidance will come out before those sort of treatment things can open in September, but I don't know if anyone has an answer to that, David or Charlotte, whether you know in more detail, or when we could expect. Presumably the guidance has got to be out before September. No, so
no.
Honey, we will. I mean,
sorry, I'll have a look through.
Yeah. I don't know anything on that specific point, sorry.
No,
No, that's fine, don't worry. I don't think anyone does. I think we're all kind of winging some of the things. It's more common.
Kevin, can I make a suggestion as to what we do with that?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, what we do is, as part of our risk assessment, we've made it a kind of a voluntary choice on the staff or their part to every day they're to make 2 checks, you know, at the start and the end of the day, and they're just to record it on the sheet. So we welcome them to do it. Obviously, it's not enforced, but as part of our risk assessment, and we've purchased the thermometers, you know, the one that they can be done instantly. So we encourage them to do it, you know, so it doesn't require someone else to do it for them. So that might be a way around, and then keeping a chart there somewhere where they can actually enter and note the recording somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's more the clients I'm more worried about. I kind of trust the therapist more than maybe a client who's thought, I haven't had a massage for 4 months. Only or something, the therapists feel that they have our support to almost be able to say, we'll see you if we don't. So I think I might put something in our policy of before treatments, these are the things that that may be of you until things are clearer.
I think that's an interesting model for you, sir. And if anyone's got templates they could share of any of these things, I think that would be great. And I think, honey, I mean, the only thing I would just say as a general point is that obviously you've got, in a sense, you've got more control over users than staff in this situation, in that you can refuse to see a user if there are doubts, whereas it's a bit trickier if staff start refusing to take tests and things. Chloe, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to clarify something about the age bracket, but my question was answered, so it's fine. Thank you.
All right. Okay, great. Any other points or questions, or have I missed any questions in the chat? Wave your hand if I've missed you. Any other points anyone wants to raise? If not, I will. I'll hand back to David and Charlotte to sum up. Anyone, unless there are other questions? No. Okay. David, Charlotte. Well, thanks very much for this. Are there any concluding remarks you'd like to make?
I guess one of the things that you've mentioned is that this is a kind of moving feast, and we need to be good to kind of reconvene at different points, because they'll, for all of us, there's going to be some unknowns that we come across, and we'll kind of it'd be quite good as a peer group to continue to connect, to kind of share your own learning on how you've overcome particular issues, and to share information on what you're doing. I think in one thing I should have mentioned perhaps earlier on is that you can become a locality member. So as I say, if you're a community organisation and you're focusing on a kind of geographical area, and we've opened up our membership so that it's free. So we have something called network membership now that you can join and get access to a lot of our tools, and you can get involved in some of our sort of more pan London and England wide kind of meetings on some of these issues. Obviously not stepping on your toes, Kevin, in terms of the important kind of infrastructure work that happens, for Camden, but just adding some value to that, hopefully.
Great. Well, and Charlotte, anything you want to add?
Not especially. I think David's covered it. It's very nice to meet you all, and good luck with the opening. And it would be nice to do a regular, catch up again.
Yes. Well, let's look into that, because I think you're right. This is moving so fast. Let's try and catch up again in the not too distant future. So Charlotte and David, thanks very much for this, and thanks for Locality for the work you do with community buildings. And I'd like to thank Camden Council for making this possible. Couple of very quick announcements. We've got our Voluntary Action Forum running every fortnight. It's going really well. Next week's on Wednesday is looking at funding for BAME organisations. So do sign up for that if it's relevant. And on Tuesday evening, we've got the VAC AGM. So thanks very much. We will get this recording and the presentations up, and we've got a section in resources, which I think we're calling Planning for the Future. So we will add the PowerPoint to that as well. So thanks very much to all of you for coming. It's been great to see you. Sorry we didn't have time to do introductions, especially for those of you who maybe this is your first time. But in the future, we will always try and do introductions. So hopefully you'll come again to a future one, and we'll give you all more time to have a say.